How to Train Your Spirit to Overrule Your Body, Kenyon's Lost Discipline. This is the teaching Kenyon called the forgotten secret of the strong believer, the discipline of training the inward man to lead and the outward man to follow. Here is the premise. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:16, "Though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day." And Kenyon leaned on that verse his whole ministry, teaching that there are two men living in one body, an inward man made new in the Spirit, and an outward man still groaning under weakness, sickness, and fear. And the tragedy he saw everywhere was believers letting the outward man give the orders, when the inward man was the one built to reign. So let us put this in our own mouths right now. I am training my spirit to lead. I am refusing to let my body's report be the final word. I am stronger on the inside than anything I feel on the outside. Say it with me. I am stronger on the inside than anything I feel on the outside. Again, I am stronger on the inside than anything I feel on the outside. And if this kind of teaching steadies you, subscribe now, so that tomorrow's teaching finds you the moment it arrives. Before we go further, type the words "I'm ready" in the comments, so I know you are ready to actually put this discipline to work and not just listen to it. The first key is knowing there are two men inside you, and only one of them was built to rule. And Kenyon taught that man is spirit, has a soul, and lives in a body, 3 parts, not one. And most people live as though they are only a body, with some thoughts and feelings attached. They let a headache decide their mood. They let a bank statement decide their identity. They let a bad report decide their future. But Kenyon said the real you, the you God recreated, is the spirit. And the spirit was never meant to take orders from the body. It was meant to give them. Picture an ordinary Monday morning. The alarm goes off, and before a single thought has formed, the body already speaks first. It aches, it groans, it says, "Stay under the blanket," and most people obey that voice instantly, without ever asking whether it was the right one to listen to. They let the loudest voice in the room be the one still half asleep. Kenyon watched believers do this for years, letting the outward man cast the first vote every single morning, and then wondering why the day always seemed to follow the body's mood instead of the spirit's calm. Think of a ship again. The body is the hull, tossed by every wave. The soul is the sails, catching every wind of feeling. But the spirit is meant to be the captain, standing steady no matter what the sea is doing. When the captain lets the waves steer the ship, everyone drowns. When the captain takes the wheel, the ship gets home. And here is the part Kenyon stressed most. The captain does not need the storm to stop before he takes command. He simply takes it. The hull will always creak. The sails will always catch bad wind sometimes. That is simply what hulls and sails do. But a captain who waits for calm water before leading was never a captain at all. So today, when your body says one thing and the word in your spirit says another, ask yourself, who is captain right now? Not who feels loudest, not who spoke first, but who was actually built for the wheel. So speak this decree with me. I am spirit first and body second, and I am putting my spirit back at the wheel. Again, I am spirit first and body second, and I am putting my spirit back at the wheel. The second key is learning the difference between sense knowledge and revelation knowledge, because Kenyon said this one distinction alone would change everything. Sense knowledge is what your eyes, ears, and body report to you. The ache, the fatigue, the fear rising in the chest, the number on the scale, the tone in someone's voice. And it is real. It is not imaginary. But Kenyon insisted it is not final. Revelation knowledge is what the Word declares over you, which sometimes agrees with your senses and sometimes flatly contradicts them, and the discipline is choosing which voice gets to be the judge. Imagine a courtroom. Sense knowledge is a very loud witness, banging the table, shouting the same complaint every day. But revelation knowledge is the judge's ruling, and a witness does not get to overturn the judge, no matter how loud he yells. Picture a man waking up on a Monday morning with a heavy chest and a mind already rehearsing every reason the week will go badly. His senses hand him a full report before his feet even hit the floor. Tired, behind on bills, dreading a meeting, and if he lets that report stand unchallenged, he will carry it like a verdict all day. But Kenyon taught that same man has another option: to let the word cross-examine that witness, to say plainly, "My body reports weariness, but the word says my strength is renewed," and to keep saying it not as denial, but as an appeal to a higher court. So when your body reports weariness, and the word says the joy of the Lord is your strength, you do not deny that tiredness is there. You simply refuse to let it write the verdict. This is not pretending. Kenyon was clear about that. It is a legal decision, choosing which report stands as true when the two disagree. A farmer does not deny winter looks like nothing is growing, but he still knows the seed in the ground is alive, because he trusts what he knows over what he sees. That is revelation knowledge overruling sense knowledge. And think of how a thermostat works compared to a thermometer. The thermometer only reports the temperature in the room, but the thermostat governs it. Sense knowledge behaves like a thermometer, endlessly accurate about the present moment, and endlessly powerless to change it. Revelation knowledge behaves like a thermostat. It does not deny the cold. It sets the standard the room must eventually rise to meet. And every time you practice it in something small, a bad mood, a tired body, a nervous thought, you are training the muscle for the bigger storms later. The same way a courtroom judge does not need to raise his voice to overrule a shouting witness. He simply rules, calmly, and the ruling stands. So speak this decree with me. My body may report, but the word rules on the verdict. Again, my body may report, but the word rules on the verdict. The third key is the discipline of confession, because Kenyon taught over and over that the mouth is the meeting place between the inward man and the outward world. What you say with your lips is what your spirit sends out to take dominion, and what you say repeatedly is also what trains your own body to listen. Think about how a dog learns commands, not from one shout, but from the same word spoken calmly and consistently until the dog's whole body responds to it automatically. Your body is like that dog. It has been trained for years by your complaints, your fears, your habitual words about yourself, so it flinches at the first sign of trouble because that is the training it has received. Kenyon said, if you have been saying, "I always get sick this time of year," or "I can never handle stress," or "my body always lets me down," you have been the trainer, and your body has simply learned the lesson well. Picture a man who wakes every single morning and groans before his feet even hit the floor. He says it half joking, "Another day, my back is already killing me," and he says it so often that his body starts rehearsing the ache before he even stands up. The words arrive first, and the sensation follows right behind them like a servant that has been trained to expect the order. This is what Kenyon meant when he said, confession is not describing your condition, it is producing it. Most people think they are only reporting what is true, when really they are planting what will grow. So the discipline is retraining with new words, spoken with the same repetition and the same calm authority, not shouted once in desperation, but said quietly and consistently until the body starts to expect the new command instead of the old one. This is why Kenyon put such weight on saying what the Word says about you, rather than saying what your feelings say about you. Not as a magic trick, but as daily retraining. Imagine that same man instead choosing, before his feet hit the floor, to say quietly, "I am strong for this day," and doing this not once but every morning for months. At first his body does not believe him, the old ache still whispers, but repetition is patient, and slowly the new command starts to outweigh the old one. A person who has said for 10 years, "I am weak," cannot expect one dramatic prayer to undo 10 years of training. That would be like expecting a dog trained for a decade to obey a brand new command on the very first try. But a person who says for 10 weeks, "I am strong in spirit, steady in mind, and full of life," day after day, quietly and on purpose, is doing the same patient work the old fear once did, only now working for them instead of against them. Kenyon would remind believers that this is not about denying pain or pretending nothing hurts. It is about refusing to let the mouth become a megaphone for the very thing you want to leave behind. Every word is either training your body toward the old fear or toward the new life. There is no neutral speech, so speak this decree with me. My words are training my body, and today I train it toward life. Again, my words are training my body, and today I train it toward life. The fourth key is feeding the spirit the way you feed the body, because Kenyon noticed something almost embarrassingly simple. People feed their bodies 3 times a day without having to think about it. They plan meals. They notice when they are hungry. They would never dream of going a week without eating. And yet they will go weeks, sometimes years, without feeding the spirit anything at all, and then wonder why the spirit is too weak to overrule the body when a crisis comes. A starved captain cannot steer a ship in a storm, no matter how much authority he technically holds. So Kenyon's discipline was deliberate daily feeding of the inward man on the Word, not as a religious chore to check off, but the way you would take feeding a hungry child seriously. Small portions, taken often, chewed slowly, actually absorbed rather than skimmed. Picture a young mother who would never forget to feed her infant just because the day got busy. She builds her whole schedule around that feeding because she knows the child cannot grow on being forgotten. Kenyon asked believers to treat their own inward man with that same seriousness, not an afterthought squeezed in if there is time, but the center the whole day is arranged around. He taught that most people's spirits are anemic, not because the Word lacks power, but because it was never actually eaten, only glanced at. Think of the difference between glancing at a restaurant menu and actually eating the meal. One leaves you informed, the other leaves you strengthened, and the same is true of hearing a verse once in passing, compared to sitting with it, turning it over, letting it settle into you until it becomes part of your actual bloodstream of thought. Imagine a man who reads a single sentence about strength in the morning newspaper, and then wonders by afternoon why he feels no stronger. Of course he does not. A headline is not a meal. And Kenyon said, this is exactly what happens when someone hears a sermon once a week and expects that thin exposure to carry them through 5 days of pressure. The body would never accept 1 meal a week as sufficient. Yet the spirit is routinely asked to survive on far less. Now picture an actual week in an ordinary life, a warehouse worker named nobody in particular. He wakes early, he grabs coffee, he works 10 hours on his feet, and somewhere in there his back aches and his patience thins. On Sunday he hears one good teaching and feels lifted for a few hours. But by Tuesday the lift is gone, the ache is back, the short temper is back, and he assumes the teaching simply stopped working. But Kenyon would say the teaching did not fail him. He simply stopped eating after 1 bite and expected the meal to sustain him for a week. No meal works that way, not for the body and not for the spirit. The same worker, if he took even 5 quiet minutes each morning before the shift, 1 verse, 1 truth, chewed slowly instead of skimmed, would be feeding the very captain that has to steer him through 10 hours of aching feet and short tempers. This is why Kenyon urged believers to feed the inward man before the outward man got hungry, before the day's pressures arrived, because a spirit fed only in emergencies is always playing catch-up, always thin, always outmatched by a body that eats on schedule every single day. Picture two neighbors. One only calls a doctor when the pain becomes unbearable. The other tends their health quietly every day, so the emergency rarely comes at all. The second neighbor is not luckier. They simply fed the right thing consistently, and Kenyon said the same principle governs the inward man. Feed it daily, and it rarely has to fight from a position of weakness. Neglect it, and it is always fighting uphill. And notice something else about feeding. You do not feed a body once and declare the matter permanently settled. The hunger returns by evening, whether you enjoyed feeding it or not, and the spirit works exactly the same way. Yesterday's meal does not carry today, which is precisely why Kenyon refused to let believers treat one dramatic spiritual high as enough supply for the months that follow. The discipline is not the mountaintop moment. It is the plain returning to the table again and again, long after the excitement of the first meal has faded. So the discipline is simple, even if it is not easy. Decide on a portion, a few verses, a single truth, and return to it daily, the way you return to the table, not because you feel like it every time, but because the body downstream depends on the spirit upstream being properly nourished. A farmer does not water his field only when he feels inspired. He waters it because the crop depends on it, regardless of his mood that morning. And your spirit's daily feeding works the same way. Faithful regardless of feeling, because what grows from it will outlast the mood entirely. Over months, this quietly reverses the whole balance of power. The spirit grows sturdy, thick, well-fed, and the body that used to shout the loudest starts to notice it is no longer running the house. It still speaks, it still reports its aches and worries, but it is no longer the one deciding what happens next. The warehouse worker who fed his spirit 5 quiet minutes each morning for a year is, by the end of that year, not a different man on the outside, same job, same aching feet, same long shifts, but on the inside, the captain is fed, alert, and steady. And steady is exactly what a well-fed spirit becomes. So speak this decree with me. I feed my spirit daily, so it has the strength to lead. I feed my spirit daily, so it has the strength to lead. The fifth key is remembering dominion was always the design, not something you have to earn, but something you have to reclaim. Kenyon pointed back to the very first pages, where man was given dominion over every living thing, and he taught that this dominion was never only about animals and fields, it was about the whole created order, including the pull of one's own body and its moods. Dominion means the ability to govern, rather than be governed, and Kenyon's whole discipline rests on this one conviction, that the recreated human spirit was handed back that same dominion. So when believers act like helpless victims of their own moods, their own aches, their own fear, they are living beneath a rank they already hold, like a king wandering his own palace, convinced he is a servant. Let me give you a picture of what this actually looks like on an ordinary Tuesday. Imagine a man waking up already dreading the day, his chest tight before his feet even hit the floor, his mind already rehearsing everything that could go wrong at work, and his first instinct is to treat that dread as the truth of the day, to let it decide his posture, his tone with his family, his whole outlook before breakfast is even finished. That man is technically standing in a palace of dominion and sleeping in the cellar instead, because nobody ever told him plainly that the dread knocking on the door does not get to also hold the keys. Kenyon would say, the dread is sense knowledge doing what sense knowledge always does, reporting loudly, But the man was never handed dominion over his circumstances, only he was handed dominion over his own reactions first, and that is the dominion most people forget they are even allowed to use. Think about someone handed the keys to a house and told plainly, "This is yours to run," and yet they spend years sleeping in the cellar because no one reminded them the keys were real. That is exactly what it looks like to have spiritual authority over your own inner weather and never once pick up the keys. The tragic part is not that the authority is missing. The tragic part is that it sits unused, generation after generation, while the very people who carry it keep asking permission for something already placed in their own hand. So Kenyon taught that this is the quiet heartbreak of the ordinary believer. Not a lack of power, but a forgotten deed to the house they already own. And Kenyon taught that this dominion is not loud or forced. A true king does not scream at his own furniture to behave. He simply governs from a settled place. Notice that a captain in a real storm does not outshout the wind. He does not win by being louder than the waves. He wins by being steadier than the waves. And this is why Kenyon so often described the mature believer as calm in the middle of chaos, not because nothing is happening around them, but because the inward man has quietly taken up his rightful seat and refuses to be moved off it just because the weather changed. Think of someone who has done a task 10,000 times. A surgeon's hands, a pianist's fingers, a craftsman's grip. Their hands do not shake anymore, not because the task became easy, but because their authority over it became natural through repetition. That is what training toward dominion looks like. It is small daily reclaiming of ground. Refusing panic here, refusing collapse there, saying no quietly to the old reflex one more time today, until governing your own inner weather becomes as ordinary and unremarkable as governing your own hand, reaching for a cup. This is the difference between a believer constantly begging for relief and a believer quietly exercising a dominion already given. One is knocking on a door hoping someone on the other side eventually opens it. The other is holding the key the whole time and simply has to remember to use it. Picture two people in the very same stressful week, same deadlines, same bills, same uncertain news. One spends the week pleading for the circumstances themselves to change first, before he can feel steady, and the other quietly governs his own inward response, regardless of whether the circumstances shift at all, and it is the second one who discovers, almost by surprise, that the storm outside starts to matter less once the storm inside has already been put in its place. So, speak this decree with me. I already hold dominion, and today I use it instead of begging for it. Again, I already hold dominion, and today I use it instead of begging for it. The sixth key is the one Kenyon considered the actual discipline itself, more than any single idea, because he taught that none of this becomes real through understanding alone. It becomes real only through daily practiced action, what he called acting on the word rather than merely agreeing with it in your head. There is a real difference between believing a bridge can hold your weight and actually walking out onto it, and Kenyon said, most believers stay on the shore, nodding along with true doctrine, while never actually stepping onto what they claim to believe. The discipline of training the spirit to overrule the body is not a single decision made once in a dramatic moment. It is a small choice, repeated on ordinary days when nothing is watching. It is getting up on a tired morning and choosing steadiness before checking how you feel. It is speaking calm over a nervous stomach before an appointment instead of rehearsing the worst outcome. It is thanking the inward man for its strength quietly at midday instead of waiting for a crisis to remember you have any strength at all. None of these moments look impressive from the outside, and that is exactly the point. Kenyon warned that people want the discipline to arrive as one grand breakthrough, but it actually arrives the way physical strength arrives, through unglamorous repetition. The same lift performed on 1,000 unremarkable days, until one day the weight that used to flatten you no longer does. Picture a man who has struggled for years with a nervous stomach every time he has to speak in front of others. The first time he tries this discipline, he stands backstage, his hands shaking, his body screaming retreat, and instead of agreeing with the shaking, he quietly says under his breath, "My spirit is steady, my body is simply along for the ride." Nothing dramatic happens. His hands still shake a little, but he walks out anyway. The next month, the same meeting comes around, the same fear rises, and he says the same quiet words again, still shaking, still walking out anyway. This happens 9 times, 10 times, and somewhere around the 11th time, he notices his hands are not shaking anymore before he even opens his mouth. Nothing magical occurred that day. What occurred was 11 ordinary days of choosing the same direction, the same way a path gets worn into a field, not by one person walking it once with great intensity, but by many ordinary footsteps taken the same direction day after day, until the ground itself remembers the way. That is what you are doing every time you choose the Spirit's report over the body's complaint. You are wearing a new path into your own inner ground, and eventually that path becomes the natural way your whole being moves, without strain, without having to fight for it fresh every single time. This is why Kenyon called it a discipline and not a discovery. A discovery happens once, you read it, you feel the thrill of it, and it sits in your memory as a nice idea. But a discipline happens daily. It asks nothing of your memory and everything of your feet, and the believer who actually walks this out over months and years ends up almost unrecognizable from the one who started, not because their circumstances necessarily changed first, but because the balance of power inside them quietly shifted. The captain took the wheel and stayed there. Think about how differently 2 people respond to the exact same bad news. One has spent a year training the inward man daily, small confessions, small feedings, small refusals to panic, and the other has spent that same year simply reacting to whatever the body and the circumstances shouted loudest. The news lands on both of them equally hard, but one has a trained captain at the wheel and the other has an empty wheelhouse. That difference was not decided in the moment the news arrived. It was decided in 1,000 quiet mornings before it ever arrived. This is the part Kenyon wanted believers to actually hear, that the discipline is being built right now, today, in the small, unremarkable moment you are in, not saved up for some future emergency. So the final practice is simply this: tomorrow morning, before you check how your body feels, before you check your phone, before the world gets its first word in, speak first from your spirit. Let the inward man have the first word of the day instead of the last desperate word at the end of it. And do this again the next day, and the next after that, until it is no longer a discipline you have to remember, but simply who you have become. The path gets worn in slowly. Then one day you realize you are not fighting your body anymore. You are simply leading it, the way a captain who has sailed the same waters for years no longer needs to grip the wheel with white knuckles. He just steers, calm, certain, home in sight. So speak this decree with me: I practice daily until my spirit's rule becomes my normal life. Again, I practice daily until my spirit's rule becomes my normal life. Here is the whole picture. You are not only a body with a mood attached, you are a spirit with a body under its charge. Sense knowledge will keep reporting loudly, but the word gets the final ruling. Your own mouth is training your body every day, whether you notice it or not. Feeding your spirit daily gives it the strength to actually lead. Dominion was never something you had to earn, but something you were always meant to reclaim, and none of it becomes real without the quiet daily practice of choosing the inward man's report first. So let us say the whole thing together one final time. I am stronger on the inside than anything I feel on the outside. Say it with me. I am stronger on the inside than anything I feel on the outside. And that is the lost discipline Kenyon spent his life trying to hand back to ordinary believers. Not a trick, not a performance, just the daily patient training of the inward man until it finally does what it was always built to do: lead,